Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast. Today is episode 24, and we have Daniel Kustelski joining the show. Daniel was born in the U.S., and having spent time in South Africa, has gained experience in global betting and wagering. He has run a number of betting businesses and is back in America as the CEO of Chalkline Sports. Today he'll discuss everything from in-play betting, the U.S. betting landscape, and the challenges for operators and bettors in the 2017 global betting climate. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback and potential future guests you'd like to hear from. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed Jake's chat with Daniel Kustelski.
Today I'm joined by Daniel Kustelski. Daniel, thank you very much for joining me.
Great, happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Daniel, you're based in the US now, so I want to get stuck into some topics about the US and what it's like to be in the US and the betting world here, and obviously some of the business aspects from an American point of view. But before we get there, you have a very intriguing and interesting background. I've sort of taken an interest in some of the stuff you've been doing in the past and what you're up to now, and some of the public, appearances you've made and what you've spoken about. So for those who haven't had the luxury of going through some of the cool things you've been working on, do you want to take us into your background, a little bit of your history to where you are now?
Yeah, that'd be great. I started my illustrious career after graduating from the United States Military Academy. I was an officer in the Corps of Engineers in the U.S. Army. So I spent about 5 years in the Army, and I got out in 2001, and I had met my wife in the Army, who is South African. So after I got out of the Army, I just wanted to travel a little bit and unwind. So I went to South Africa for about 6 months, and we decided to get married, and I did my MBA down there. And so my life in South Africa started in about 2002. And I always wanted to earn a living in sports, and I certainly wasn't a good enough athlete. So I got involved in sports marketing, and in 2004, FIFA decided to have the World Cup in South Africa. So South Africa was a hotbed for a lot of sports marketing activity, and it was a lot of fun. But pretty quickly, in 2007, 2008, we started to work with sports betting brands and gambling brands, because there's a very close correlation between the gambling industry and sports marketing and being associated with teams and leagues. And so I got involved in sports betting. Actually, we launched VoltBet in 2009. It was licensed out of the Western Cape in Cape Town. And we started a sports book. My current partner now, he was the tech behind it, and I was the operations and the commercial guy. And we ran a successful book, and we actually got bought by a large land-based casino group called Sun International in 2013. I spent about 18 months after that acquisition, and then I came back to the United States after spending more than enough time overseas, and came back, and I started running an online horse racing business called Watch and Wager. And it was I did that for about 18 months, but the sports betting bug bit me. And and there was a lot of activity that was happening in 2015, 2016. So started my own business called Chalkline Sports.
Very, very cool. For those who haven't been to South Africa or don't know what the betting culture's like there, or even what the wagering world has to offer in South Africa, do you want to take us through that briefly, and maybe some similarities with different parts of the world that you've seen, or maybe a comparison? Is it more of a UK, Australia style, or is it more US? What's the guess on South Africa?
Yeah, it's an interesting market in that the land-based sports betting is really about soccer, football. It's probably 70-80% of the wagering that happens. you have this weird mix of our book was probably about 35 to 40% rugby. I'd say 30% cricket, 20% soccer, and then some tennis and some odds and ends, some basketball. So yeah, it really depends on what kind of sports book that you're running. If you're online only, you're going to get a pretty broad mix, and it's going to be a pretty low margin business. Whereas if you're in the shops in South Africa, it's going to be much higher margins, lots of multiples, and it's all going to be soccer.
So is it a really competitive wagering market? Are there a lot of professionals there who know exactly what they're doing, and you've got to balance sort of the professionals and the recreational money, or is it more focused on the multiples and the parlay bets and combining lots of matches, which obviously helps on the operator side and the bookmaker side from getting the percentage out of those bets?
Yeah, no, it's there's quite a few really sharp individuals, and yeah, they understand rugby, they understand cricket well, and football's a relatively decent margin sport. So there's a lot that can happen in a soccer match that's random, less so maybe in some other sports, and that's where you get your sharp guys that come in and really know what they're doing. So yeah, obviously risk management, and mobile and online guys are taking wagers 24/7. They're trying to find problems in the software. They're trying to find opportunities that exist, and so yeah, you're always on your front feet trying to manage risk with an online book.
So when you finished up with Watch and Wager and you moved into Chalkline Sports, what was sort of the rationale and thinking? Because obviously the US is a pretty unique sort of place for sports betting, given the scene with Las Vegas, and then very minimal, if any, sports betting outside of Las Vegas in a couple of states, and for the most part it's illegal to bet on sports. So give us an insight into your mindset in the US thinking about sports betting. I guess for those who haven't sort of lived the experience of living in the US and the way sports betting is treated and handled, what were you thinking at that time, and what led to Chalkline?
Well, the thinking was that the challenges that exist in sports books, certainly online and land-based across regulated jurisdictions, is that they spend a lot of their net revenues on marketing. So I think it's 25 to 30% of their net revs are spent on marketing, and that's pretty inefficient for any industry. And having operated before, I thought, let me just focus on this one particular item. As an operator, you're worried about risk, you're worried about tech, you're worried about regulatory issues and compliance issues and customer service, and you're worried about a whole bunch of things. And marketing sometimes doesn't really sit on the top 3 or top 4 of the list. So the concept of Chalkline really was born out of helping operators, be much more efficient in that one particular area of their business. So we take a lot of data, all the data that exists, and we visualize it. It's put it on mobile phones and really automate content for operators to go out there and acquire customers and retain customers in a much more efficient manner than what they're currently doing. That's in regulated markets. Now, obviously, we're based here in the United States, and it was hard. It's hard not to notice all the things that are happening in the United States. But again, it's a $5 billion industry in Nevada that's legal, I've operated a legal online horse racing business here in the United States, and while there's an allure to gravitate towards the U.S. because of all of the illegal betting that's happening, we're really focusing a lot of our time and energy on the regulated markets, the soon-to-be regulated markets like the U.S. There are opportunities, and our platform applies to the soon-to-be regulated markets where it's a play for fun. We have pick'em games and content and sports betting information that every gambler every sports bettor that would want. But we're really applying that to the casinos that might get the sports betting licenses here in the United States and the tracks, rather than looking at the offshore books.
So do you think you would have moved into the operator side if it had been a different regulatory and legal environment in the US? Because I feel as though a lot of the research and development and technology and things like that are lost in the betting space just because, and you're a perfect example, you've come from another country, you've come to the US, the scene is set here with Las Vegas, and it's relatively saturated. It's obviously a big market, and there's obviously a place for disruption, but someone like yourself had to move into a automated content service and obviously still technology, but not specific to sports betting, which in my mind is a loss for the overall industry. And, Silicon Valley is obviously not heavily involved in sports betting R&D or anything like that. Do you think you would have approached it differently had the regulatory environment been similar to where you came from in South Africa?
I would have. I think that having operated an online horse racing site here in the United States did open my eyes to the challenges of being an operator. We were licensed in North Dakota. In the short amount of time that I was there, the amount of reporting that we had to provide to the various states in various time intervals, whether that was weekly or monthly, and based on what they wanted as reports, it grew quite onerous. So operating in the United States is far different than operating, I think, I venture to say, in most other countries. And that was an eye opener, and that was probably one of the reasons why I thought to myself, let's maybe look at the periphery and help operators be a little more efficient rather than actually taking the bet myself. That's going to be a challenge for anybody that operates in the United States on a national basis.
So I'm interested in your operator experience from the perspective of pre-game betting versus in-play betting. Obviously, you've spent time in recent years with an online business, and you've seen, I guess, the split of money that's come in a pre-match format. That's obviously before the game started, and then obviously all of the money that's being bet as the game's being played. In your experience, what's the split of that money? Is it 50-50 or is it higher or lower? What's sort of your experience in terms of pre-game money versus in-play money?
Yeah, in Africa, that really kind of depends on the sport. I mean, I think if cricket inherently is an in-play sport to wager on. You're always betting on over and under runs. And so, our book was, 99% live and play. Your rugbies and your American footballs and the football or the soccer, that's probably going to be 60 or 70%. The rate limiting step is always technology. So how long, as an operator, can you have prices out there where customers can actually place that wager and place those bets? And then obviously there are some legal, jurisdictional issues, like Australia, where I think you can only phone in play. So in Africa, I would say in play is probably about 50% of all of those wagers, and that's increasing. In Europe, it's 70 to 80%, and that's probably increasing as well. Here in the United States, I think we're looking at about 20 to 25% out of Nevada is live and play. And that's a little surprising to me because I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. American sports are riddled with advertising during the game, and it presents so many good opportunities to place wagers. As an operator and as a tech provider, you've got big windows to leave prices out there for bettors. So I think that here in the U.S. there's that's certainly one of the big opportunities for books, not just in Nevada but as they roll out across the nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I asked was because I speak to people here in the U.S. and I'll say, as just a side question, what do you think the percentage of in-play bets is on something like NFL, where if it's a no-huddle offense, you can have 20, 30, 40 seconds in between plays sometimes, and it's quite easy in that window with the current technology to place a bet. And they might even say like, I don't think you can place a bet in play. You just bet on the spread before the game, or, you take a few different, wagers on who's going to win and the line, maybe under over. Some of the derivative markets they'll know, but for the most part, they don't even realize that in play is something that's possible. And when you discuss it and open up the possibility and talk about it, their mind is blown quite often, which is something that's relatively simple for those who've been exposed to it, and also more common than pre-game betting. So I guess, what do you think the potential is? I think obviously the numbers you mentioned in Nevada being anything below 50%, I would say is low around the world based on a world's global standard. Do you think there's room to move in Nevada and obviously the US as it opens up more and more?
Plenty, but the rate limiting step, I would agree with you, is the gambler, is the sports bettor. When you've never really been exposed to live and play, and if you're just one of those guys that takes a position before, in pregame, and then you're just trading in and out of those positions, during the game, that takes a level of sophistication that, most Americans probably just aren't familiar with. Having said that, though, once it becomes legal and once it becomes part of the sports betting culture, I think that live and play is going to be massive in the United States, and it's because the sports are so well geared commercially for the stoppages and for those places, for those times to wager.
Yeah, it's almost as if timeouts were invented for sports betting, and that 3-minute window between important parts of the game.
Yes,
is the perfect scenario, which is I haven't heard that in the mainstream media, and I certainly wouldn't be, blasting it all over ESPN. But the way the football scoring is, and the way the football game style is, with those 10, 15 second increments between plays, it's a pretty perfect situation. So I guess thinking about that topic a little bit more, what would need to be some of the protections? Thinking, I guess, on the operator side, based on your experience and what you did in Africa, and also on the bettors side, do you need, viable video feeds where you can have someone monitoring, or do you need other technologies in place so that you can be protected and someone isn't, getting 2-3 seconds ahead of you and then winning a lot of money, which you can obviously find out pretty quickly? But what are some of the things you think about as an operator or even a bettor when you're talking about in-play betting?
Yeah, it's all about tech and risk management, and so. If you're competing with a guy inside the stadium, and I'm not, and in my trading team, they're not getting the feed until 3 or 4 seconds later. If that's standard definition, high def might be a little longer. Those are all factors that you have to consider from a risk management perspective. And it's about having great tech. It's about being able to identify those customers that that have tried to take you out in the past around timing issues. Individually putting some time limits on them placing their wagers, and size of bets. Limiting size of bets on an individual basis all the way through to a team and a game and a league basis, and then rolling up all of that risk, that might be existing in parlays. So if people are adding in-game plays to parlays, so all of those factors are important. But having said that, the technology, it already exists. Maybe not here in the United States, and not to the level of sophistication that it needs to. But those are all great challenges to try and overcome, because that means that people are wanting to use your product and you're getting the revenue. Inherently, live and play is usually a smaller margin business than pregame. But it's handled nonetheless, and as an operator, that's really what you want. You want activity.
So it is a lower margin for the operators, is it?
It was for us in South Africa. It probably is across the globe as well.
And is that because the smarter people are doing it and they're backing their opinion a lot more, and those who are just dabbling might not bet as much and might not necessarily need to bet if they got a pre-match bet on? Or what are some of the reasons why it's such a low margin?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. First of all, every book is going to have a slightly different risk profile, because every book is a market maker. So if I'm taking a lot of money on Man United versus Chelsea, and I'm taking a lot of money on Man United, I might get guys that come in from that have a couple of different books open, and they're cleaning me out on my big price on Chelsea. So that's one of the issues. But also you have a slightly different sports bettor that gambles live and play a lot, and those guys are sharp. They're really smart guys. So you're going head to head with those guys on prices that they've got an entire universe of markets out there to pick from, and you're just one of them, and you're just trying to balance your own book.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the biggest challenges with in-play, which you've already sort of touched on, is the education aspect of the regular gambler, just so they can understand what's possible. And I guess without having in-play as a viable option in the US, especially if it's 20-25% of the total handle, for example, you're not going to have those hedging possibilities. You're not going to have those people who are trading in a more typical stock market use of the word. It's going to be just a pre-game bet, and that's it. So I think until that catches up to what the technology is, and I think there's a large gap there, certainly here in the US, then there's going to be challenges. But I think once it does, and given what we've discussed about the timing with some of the sports here, it's a pretty lucrative option for those who are on the operator side, and even for those who are betting and gambling professionally. They should be thinking about what those possibilities might be and have an expanded portfolio of options. And I know that some of the previous guests who have sort of hedge funds and sports hedge funds who are based outside of the US have thought about it, but it's just not there yet. So I guess it's certainly an interesting topic to talk about. And I guess moving forward with the future of sports betting and what it's going to be like, what are some of the thoughts, from your perspective, being in the US, living here, having the background, what have you seen? And I guess where is it headed in the next even 12 months to sort of 3 years?
Yeah, without a doubt, it's going to be a land-based play in my head. The licenses are going to go to the existing infrastructure. It's going to go to the land-based casino groups. It's going to go to the tracks, and there might be mobile on premises, but I don't foresee the immediate jump to statewide online sports betting like what you see in Nevada. I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow roll, and that's going to hamper the rollout of sports betting, I think, in the U.S. And that, right now people are gambling. The American Gaming Association says $150 billion. It might be more than that, might be less than that, who knows? But there's a lot of people gambling, and they're already on, pretty sophisticated sports books. They might be illegal, but they're pretty sophisticated sports books. So if the rollout is just going to be land based, I think that there's going to be, it's going to be pretty slow. And having to go into a shop to place bets, or having to go into KYC your account is going to be a challenge. That's just the nature of e-commerce versus bricks and mortar. But certainly once the U.S. gets used to sports betting and it's allowed to operate online, I think that it's going to be as big or bigger than the anticipation. I think there's going to be a lot of operators who currently understand how to operate in each one of the states and the challenges with operating in one state versus another. They'll figure out the risk management and the software and the tech, and there'll be products out there that are really going to be competitive for Americans to move from kind of the illegal market to the legal market.
So you mentioned 150 billion, which I think is the number from the AGA. Is of that 150 billion, if it's just land-based casinos getting licenses to have, a shop window within their building, within their complex, what do you think that absorption is going to be like? Because in my mind, those people who live on their phones, which is me and my generation, and certainly the older and younger generation to an extent, aren't going to walk 10, 15, 20 minutes, jump in their car necessarily 15, 20 minutes to go and just place a bet. They might do it, once a week on a Sunday to bet on a number of games perhaps, but these days with sort of instant gratification, with having a computer in your hand, it seems to me a bit of a problematic scenario when you've still got that generation who like using their mobile devices to do everything, and then you're telling them they've got to go and walk into a brick and mortar shop with probably a different demographic of people and not necessarily, the greatest places to hang out on a Sunday to watch games for certain people. So do you think that'll hamper absorption? And I guess to what extent do you think of that 150 billion number, which will just take for arbitrary purposes, will be absorbed?
You bring up a great point. I think Google even say that people check their phones 150 times a day. You're exactly right. My response to that as an operator is twofold. One of them is I need the U.S. government to not just legalize sports betting, but I also need them to put in measures that prevent illegal operations as best as they can. And that is not just the operators themselves, but that's payment processors, because payment processors really actually run the gaming industry. If you're able to get money in and money out of accounts, however that might be, that fuels the fire. And if if the federal, legislation or the state legislations, start to hammer the illegal operations from that perspective, I think that as an operator that is legal and licensed in the United States in one of the states, I will have some protection, and that will be incredibly useful. On the other hand, yes, you're right. There's going to be a massive challenge to get people to go in and into a bricks and mortar location and place those wagers. But I do also know that people like to gamble, where they're protected, where their money gets protected, where bets are guaranteed, and inherently, I think most people like to do things that are legal and not illegal. So. My counter to maybe for the 150 billion, and maybe let's just say if 50% of that is online, I think that there's going to be a lot of uptake on the bricks and mortar, at least in the beginning, and they're going to know that it's going to go online pretty quickly, so they're going to want to get in and be legal from the word go.
So if you were advising the federal government or even a state legislator, for example, about the approach to the future of sports betting and legalizing it, would you recommend that they provide land-based casinos with the opportunity to purchase a license, and in conjunction with that, go after the illegal operators pretty heavily to try and stop their presence? Or alternatively, allow both land-based and online licenses and not spend the time, the resources, the money enforcing the illegal operators from not operating in that jurisdiction and using that time, resources, and money to regulate those online operators? Do you think that's a better approach, or how would you think about it from your experience?
I'll be honest with you. I don't very often put on the hypothetical hat of a state senator or congressperson, nor a federal one. But I will say that it has to go. It really does have to go to the infrastructure that already exists, and that's the land-based casinos and the tracks. They understand. They have a relationship with the state. They KYC their customers. They protect their customers. They have various programs that already exist, like responsible gambling programs that are part and parcel to their business. And as a government, I would feel far more comfortable giving a sports betting license or allowing those entities to apply for a license, rather than somebody from who has never operated in the United States ever before, and that would be far more prudent, I venture to say. So yes, definitely to the land-based casinos and the tracks, at least to begin with. And that's what's happened in Nevada anyway, though.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slow burn. It's a bit of a rollout. It's a bit of a step-by-step approach, and I guess that provides comfort, I suppose.
Yes, it does. Yes. It's prudent, I guess.
Yeah. So what else have you seen out there? I guess you're on the cutting edge, working with operators, being previously as an operator yourself and being involved in the technology side and the sports and the gambling sectors. What are we missing from a regular person walking down the street who wouldn't be as in touch with everything that you are? What are some of the future applications in sports betting that you see? Because I think about fantasy and the popularity here for many reasons, including the sabermetrics world and the advanced analytics world lending itself to having fantasy teams and things like that, which is not necessarily as strong or as widespread as other countries. But do you see sort of exchanges based purely on fantasy points and fantasy scoring, or derivative markets that allow in-game betting and up-to-date information that allow something like that from a fantasy-only fantasy sportsbook and things like that? What's some of the things here that could be possible, or that you're even seeing now that you think would be cool applications going into the future?
The number one aspect that I see happening in sports betting, probably across the globe, is it's content and it's personalization. So why do I as a gambler need to go onto a sports book and look at 50,000 different markets and try to sift through them all in order for me to get to the one market that the sportsbook should probably know that that's the one that I bet on. If I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan and I'm a Minnesota Twins fan, and I bet on Chelsea, and I've done that kind of every week for the past 2 years. Why are you going to be offering me tennis matches, and why do I even have to sift through that? And not only that from a transactional perspective, but also just from a pure content perspective. I mean, we just talked about it. We check our phones 150 times a day. Our attention span is pretty short these days. So what do we want? We want little snackable size pieces of content. And that snackable size piece of content usually will confirm a bias that I already have. If I already know that I'm going to bet on, Chelsea over Man United, or I'm going to take the All Blacks over the Aussies in rugby, well, I'm just looking at, connecting a couple of dots. How do I place my bet as quickly as possible and do that? And the sports books really are well positioned to take all of that data, whether it's sports data, whether it's sports betting data, or it's data about me individually, and applying all of that information in a machine learning and understanding what am I going to be betting on tomorrow, and what am I going to be betting on in the next few months, and giving me a really tailored sports betting entertainment solution. That's really what I see happening in the relatively near future. Sports books are starting to provide way more content, but it's really about, is it personalized content? Is it content that I need? Do I get my own content feed versus you having a very different content feed, but we're on the same sports book? That's all possible, and it's all being done in lots of different industries. That'll be happening probably in the next couple of years.
So how far can that stretch? Because I speak to a fair few people on this podcast about their, professional betting, and one of the common themes is they get shut down because they're winning, long term. Is it possible in the future, do you think, that, in thinking about different strategies for these professionals and how they can get around it, some of the stories I've heard are hilarious and crazy and a number of other adjectives, but can they have a situation where you go onto a sports book, and if you're a professional and you're winning long term, and they say, look, I don't want to turn you away, I'm happy for you to bet with me, but instead of minus 110 or $1.90, as we say in decimals, I'm going to give you $1.87, and obviously that's an extra couple of percent that I'm going to collect over the long term, but I'm happy to bet with you at that percentage. And you might have a recreational bettor who maybe they don't care if it's minus 110 or $1.90, they'll still bet at $1.92 or whatever it might be. Do you think it's possible in the future? And are there any issues with modifying the different odds for different people based on their tendencies and preferences?
No, but and again, that goes straight back to the personalization. We would have some of the most amazingly sharp rugby bettors on our book, but when they went into cricket, they were just useless. So me being able to, as a operator and as a provider of entertainment, to be able to say, hey, look, you know what, we're gonna offer you, maybe not as good a margin, wagering on your rugby, but we'll be pretty generous for you on the cricket. That is all part of that personalization conversation. And as a book, look, I do understand, some operators, wanting to close down accounts and manage risk and those types of things. But those gamblers actually provide you. They're a little bit of the canary in the mine. I mean, they tell you where you need to be from a risk management perspective, and that can be really useful. And using some of those really sharp gamblers for your risk management is important. So. I mean, we really didn't close that many accounts when I was in South Africa for that very reason, and it was unusual that we didn't close those accounts. But here in the United States, the risk management is going to be a challenge because if depending on the regulatory framework, you might only be able to manage a book inside of Oklahoma, and that risk management inside of Oklahoma might be very different than the risk management inside of California or inside of New York. And if you're not able to consolidate that risk, you're going to have some books with some massive positions and gamblers that are going to get their accounts closed because, they want to place big bets on one side and there's just nobody to take the other side. So,
Yeah, that's one of the big issues I see with state-by-state rollouts, and I can just hear the odds for Baker Mayfield tumbling in now for the Heisman, and there's nothing that a bookmaker can do because they've got no outs. Then they're in a bit of trouble, so they're just going to offer non-competitive markets, and if that's the case, then it's a cascading effect where no one's going to bet there who's betting a decent amount of money, and then it becomes just a non-viable betting product in that state. And I've certainly spoken to others about it in the past. It's a real concern, but that's obviously for another day and for another legislator or regulator to worry about, not for us. But I want to ask about the risk management. What you mentioned before is it seems to be done manually now, whereby if it is someone who's pretty sharp and they place a bet and the operator doesn't want to take it, it'll be pending for a while, and they'll decide, do we reduce the odds, or do we reduce a stake, or do we reduce both, or do we just decline the bet? They're kind of doing it manually now. Do you think it'll get to a point where they can automate that and say, look, Daniel's killing us on T20 cricket in the Caribbean. He's probably going to bet on this game coming up. He's betting on, who's going to win outright. Our odds are this team's going to win, at 77% of the time. Let's just frame it as if they're going to win 81% because we're happy to do that for him at that price, and he's going to bet this amount and we can accept that. Getting out ahead of that would massively increase the happiness for those professional bettors who want to bet in those markets, and maybe they're happy to take that price, maybe they're not. But some of those things, do you think in the future they'll be automated to try and reduce the customer experience issues that they're sort of having now? And unless it's an exchange, which is around 100%, those corporate bookmakers, being massive businesses, are having a lot of problems with the customer experience for those more professional bettors who are providing a lot of the volume.
Yeah. Everything else in the world is going towards the automation angle, so I can't imagine why that would be any different. I do think that the exchanges, provide an awful lot of opportunity for the books that are able to access them with a lot of volume to lay off their wagers. But if you just look at the horse racing industry and the big gamblers in the horse racing industry, they're always using the exchanges, and they're using them in a quite a sharp method, and it's all automated. So they don't know what horses they're taking. Sometimes they're just taking the good prices and the prices where they see some arbitrage, and that's. Yeah, apply that to bookmaking, and I think that's what right looks like in the future.
Can you take us through what advice you would give to fantasy sports companies in the US, especially the daily fantasy ones who are, trying to make a living now given the current regulatory environment? I think it's being done to death about the over-advertising and the proliferation of ads from the sort of big daily fantasy sites. But I guess looking forward rather than looking back, what would you be thinking about if you were involved with those? And I guess, looking towards the legalization and the different sort of possibilities, what are some of the things they should be thinking about?
You know what? They're already thinking about them, because when they went over to Europe, they had to get sports betting licenses out of the UK. So they understand, and I think it's Joe Asher out of William Hill, CEO, says daily fantasy sports betting. It's already. In my head, it's already sports wagering, and them being able to move into sports betting doesn't seem like that big of a leap. I think the biggest leap would be the shareholders and the stakeholders that they have, and some of the states that they've been trying to convince that they aren't sports betting. That's probably the challenge that they have. But their databases are probably pretty valuable, and probably have a lot of the sports bettors that exist inside the United States. The first place I would go to for all of the sports bettors would be the casino loyalty programs, because those are riddled with sports bettors. But the second place I would look is the daily fantasy place, and there's a reason why Paddy Power Betfair bought Draft, and for whatever it was, $20 million with an earn out up to 50, and that was that had to have been part of Paddy Power's play to get involved in the sports wagering and offering various types of products that span the legal aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an interesting sort of period recently for the fantasy world, so I guess we'll wait and see what happens. So one last one for you, and I guess for those potential operators out there and those thinking about sports betting and the possibilities and what the future holds, there's obviously a a contingent of massive companies, corporations. Some are public in Europe now, and obviously William Hill US is here. Some of those big conglomerates are going to be heading this way soon. What advice would you give for the smaller operators? And I guess in the same sort of realm as that, what openings do you think there will be for those smaller operators? Because it's going to be an interesting sort of rollout in the US once it's legalized and how it's legalized. But, do you see 10-man operations rolling out with sports betting offerings and those type of things that can compete with those large corporate conglomerates who are going to be here? Or do you think it's going to be a tough uphill sledding for some of those smaller companies?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be. I think the American Gaming Association is talking about a $12 billion gaming revenue industry. It will be the U.S. sports betting industry, and I mean when that happens, there are niche markets and opportunities exist in droves. So I think that it's literally just, I mean, there's going to be a lot of big players, but there's going to be so many different players, and there's going to be so many opportunities to get it right. I just venture to say that the guys that are, regardless of their size, the ones that are nimble and the ones that have good technology and get onto mobile phones, those are the guys that are going to win. And that's, it doesn't matter if you're a 10-man group or a 10-man team or you're a 150-man team. That's really, to me, the important aspects.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be cool to watch some of the new applications coming out, some of the things they can do on those devices, and see how they can compete with some of the big players. Before I let you go, Daniel, what's the best way for the listeners to reach out to you? Obviously, Twitter, Chalkline Sports, but is that the best way to be in touch?
Yeah, Daniel at chalklinesports.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy. I'm a sports betting geek, so I'm happy to talk about the industry in any form or fashion with damn near anybody.
Yeah, it's been certainly fun for me to have a chat, and I obviously have a million more questions, but maybe we'll get to that next time. And I want to thank you again for your time, and it's really cool to speak to someone who has the experience you do, and obviously with the focus on the US. So I wish you well with Chalkline Sports, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Great. I really appreciate you having me, Jake, and you have a good one.